What's up guys, Josh here with ATX Guitar Lessons. This is going to be a lesson for beginners on how to hold a pick. Seems like a very simple concept, but I think it's something that is overlooked, and definitely you want to experiment with as many ways of holding a pick as possible when you're first starting out so you can settle on something. You don't want to develop a bad habit that's going to be limiting when you move on to more difficult things. So talk about two ways to hold the pick. One is the way that I hold it. The second one will be what I've read described in books, and we'll also talk about some things to avoid and some tips. So first I'll show you how I hold the pick, how to think about setting it up in your hand. So this is just a standard size pick, nothing fancy about it, and I think of it as an extension of my index finger, so the tip of that pick is coming up just like my nail, essentially pointing straight up. And then I take my thumb and I cross it over the top, so my index and thumb are essentially making an X across the pick. One thing to note is I'm taking up the majority of the surface area on that pick, right? I only show the tip, and this is something that keeps me closer to the string, so I'm able to keep my bearings and be oriented around knowing where I'm going, where I'm coming from, and it's not always a guessing game. That's something that gets easier as you practice. It's always going to feel you're always going to feel kind of lost at the beginning, but just keep at it. But this is something that helps with it greatly. Because if you have the pick, I see a lot of beginners do this, if you have the pick sticking far out of your fingers, one, it's probably going to get knocked out by the strings because you're not able to have a firm grasp on it. And also, when you hold it like this, it'll tend to make you arch your wrist like that, which makes our strum awkward and also a lot weaker. Because now I'm moving almost all from the wrist and not incorporating my arm or elbow. So I want that wrist to be straight, and I'm going to use for the majority of the motion, I'm going to use my elbow because I get to get all these forearm muscles active, and it's much easier for those muscles are so much bigger, so they're going to it's much easier to control this small motion and just get a lot more out of it rather than just always moving the wrist. Now that's not to say that the wrist doesn't come into play, or the fingers, right? So I use the elbow to get the majority of the motion, and then the finesse is brought in with the wrist and the fingers. So when I'm holding the pick like this between my index and thumb, I can use my wrist and my fingers to kind of push and pull, change the angle of the pick depending on which direction I'm traveling to get across the strings easier, so on and so forth. One thing that I do see a lot of students do, or beginners, is they hold the pick between either their thumb and their index and middle together, which I think you'll find that things will kind of get in the way, and it will also tend to make you jut your wrist out like that. And this will especially happen if you're holding with your middle and thumb. Now the index fingers out here doesn't know what to do, and there's not as much mobility between your thumb and middle finger as there is between your index and thumb, simply because they're right next to one another, right? The movement is restricted a little bit more if you're holding it between your middle finger and thumb. So lots of things to think about there. Also, real quick, when I set my arm up on the guitar, I kind of have the pick pointing kind of like in this direction, right? So the tip isn't always going directly into the body of the guitar. I'm not totally perpendicular, and this allows me to get through the strings a little easier. If I have it perpendicular and I'm holding the pick too tight, it's going to sound like I'm trying to pop the strings. So that's another note. You don't want to squeeze the pick too hard, because that just puts tension throughout your body. I mean, especially right here, but then it just travels up to your shoulder and everywhere. It's pretty crazy how fast it'll spread. So you want to hold it hard enough, or put enough pressure on the pick to where you know the strings aren't going to take it out of your hand, but you don't want to squeeze it to where you don't have any blood flow in your fingers, right? So there's a middle ground there. Anyways, the second way that I was going to talk about holding the pick, first way is the way that I do it. What I've read in books, they kind of curl the fingers a little bit more, so they're not putting it on the tip of a finger. They're really setting it on top of this top knuckle of the index finger. So it's almost like making a fist, and then you just clamp down on the thumb, and you just have it sticking out from the top knuckle, between the top knuckle of the index finger, and then the thumb goes across. So the thumb's pretty much set up the same way. This is what's different, and it feels very different. To me, it's a little awkward. It does work. I'm just not used to it, so it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I think in the end, it's really just a personal matter. You decide what you want to do, but there are certain things that you want to avoid. So anyways, that's it. If you do have any questions, please leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer them. Visit the website below, www.atxguitarlessons.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.